let's talk about some controversial issues. I am an 8th grade teacher, and I teach reading, RLA, ELAR. I'm in Texas, whatever you want to call it. So I want, obviously, the kids to read, because if the kids are not reading, they're not growing. It's like football or basketball or baseball or volleyball, whatever, you have to practice. So it's the same way with reading. So if the kids aren't reading, which we know that they have their devices and they're on them all the time, if they're not reading, then they're not growing, and their lexile not growing, and then they're not going to be able to comprehend the text. It's a whole, plethora, and you can look at how many minutes you read versus the 90th percentile, and how many minutes you don't read, and the bottom percentile. And we can send that to parents all day long, and they still don't encourage them to read. So that's my job as the teacher, to make sure that they're reading. So there's a couple of different ways I do that. So I'm going to talk about the non-controversial one first, and then I'll get to the controversial one, because I've been doing this over 20 years. I get the controversy. So I do what we call a status of the class. So in the status of the class, little paper, it's just real easy. It's just got the title and the date and the name of the student. So I keep manila folders. Every kid has one of these, and so very first thing when they come in, I've talked about how my day goes. I'm going to do it, I call it status of the class. So they're going to tell me what book they're reading and what page they're on, and I put the date to make sure that the kids have a book that they're reading, that they're progressing, that I can talk about it, and I can talk about the books, with the kids. So that's one way that I keep track of making sure that the kids are reading. That's one way. Okay, the next way that I make sure that the kids are reading, and this is the controversial one, is I'm a big fan of AR. And so I had a love-hate relationship with it for years and years and years and years, but hear me out. Here is how I use it. So instead of doing points, I don't do points. I just do something very simple. And so depending on how many weeks you have in the term, so at the beginning, our terms are only 9 weeks. So my kids are required to read 4 books a term. 4 books. So that's basically one every other week. In the second semester, they're required to read 5, because there's 10 weeks in our term. So they read 1 book every other week, and then they take an AR test on it. Now, here's the rules for my 8th graders. They have to have a chapter book. It has to be above a 4.0. It has to be over 100 pages, and they can only read 1 nonfiction book. Everything else, you can read whatever you want to. Fiction, nonfiction, historical fiction, science fiction, mythology, fantasy, whatever you want to read, realistic fiction. You're in charge of your own books that you're reading. And so then I'm getting more authentic reading, because they're picking their books. Yes, they're reading because they have to. I make it a grade, and so they know that they have to read this X amount of books. So if it is a 4 book a week or 4 term book, then each book is worth 25 points. So if they only read 1 book for that whole entire term, it's a 25 in the grade book. If they read 2 books, it's a 50. If they read 3 books, it's a 75. So you get the whole thing, you get the concept. So that's their grade, and they have to, and I check their grades on AR, and they have to pass the test. And then they get a test average grade, because you're going to have those kids that all of a sudden are going to test on 10 books. They didn't read them, but they're going to think that counts for the grade. Well, it doesn't. 1, you have to pass, and then 2, I'm going to take your test average, and that's going to be another grade in the grade book. So if you have bombed all the tests, then your test average for AR is going to be low. So I know it's controversial, but I have found that this definitely alleviates some stress, because I'm not concerned with points. And if you look at pleasure reading is really only about a 5th grade level, even for adults. So you don't want to set the level so high. Yes, I teach 8th graders, and I have some that are reading super, super high. I have GT kids that probably could read, college level, obviously, but that's not fun to read. So that's why the level is set so low at 4.0, and I do take some that are even lower, like I Survived, The Sinking of the Titanic. Those typically are 3.8, 3.9, and I take those because, 1, it is fiction, but it's historical fiction. It does give some facts, even though they've added stories to it. So I just want the kids to read. Please, just read. They can read graphic novels, whatever. As long as it has an AR test, I don't care. Read. So this is just 2 ways that I make sure that the kids are reading, because if they're not reading, their lexile's not growing.